I'd like to be as optimistic as you, but I'm not completely convinced. I think this was a moment of panic for the Tories and for all Conservative politicians, and they saw this debanking of Nigel Farage and thought, oh, heck, we're going to be out of power soon and the banks will be able to debank all of us and there'll be absolutely nothing we can do about it. Hence the Tory, they were sprung into action. They tried to lean on the banks and the banks had this massive PR campaign against them and they backed down and they've reinstated Nigel Farage. But there is no evidence that either the politicians or the people at Coots or any other bank for that matter actually care about free speech. They sat down and they produced all these documents and they colluded to try and find a way to debank not just Farage, but hundreds of other people. They do not value free speech. And I don't think they've actually learned the lesson here about why we should value free speech. All this has taught us is that we have an extremely long way to go in your country and in my country about making these institutions and politicians value free speech rather than running frightened from one social issue to another.
Indeed, it's not just banks, is it? Most big corporate institutions have now been infected with woke ideology.
It's the ESG scam. They're basically getting rewarded for playing politics with people and their businesses. They're no longer in business in order to make money or to produce good products. They are competing to get this virtue and these donations from these larger organizations to follow political narratives. And that is not a great way to run civilization. I mean, how long is it going to be before we lose cash and then our ability to buy goods and services is going to depend on whether or not those services are deemed to be good or virtuous? I mean, if you buy a steak, you're probably going to get debanked in the next 5 years.
Well, they won't let you have steak, will they? Eventually, it's going to be a plant burger. But listen, Alexandra, I wish we had longer. Last but not least, can you tell me how the attack by Hamas on Israel last weekend is going down in Australia?
I think it's exposed an awful lot of naivety, not just from the left, whom we always knew were always championing causes that go toward the destruction of our civilization, but there are also people on the right who seem to think if they just hug it out enough, that Islamic terror will let them live. But every single person who has been defending Hamas in the last 48 hours would have been killed at that festival, because Hamas terror, like Hezbollah, like ISIS, who've all teamed up together to attack Israel, they're not just interested in attacking Israel. Islamic terror has been spreading terror and murder by the sword for 1,000 years. And I think Western countries need to look at what happened at Sydney Opera House, where 1,000 people were shouting, "Gas the Jews," and our police commissioners didn't stop it. Instead, they arrested a man holding an Israeli flag and charged, or they warned him about breaching the peace. This is a disgrace. And I was so embarrassed about what we saw in Australia and how weak our police are, considering you all saw how much strength they had during COVID, where they were throwing little old ladies to the ground and arresting pregnant women. But when it came to Islamic terror, our police ran scared and our politicians ran scared. And I think the West, including Australia, needs to get more serious about this threat, which will come after every peaceful citizen.
Well, indeed, Australia and the West have seen their own citizens out on the streets, like those scenes you've just seen there, that footage, celebrating what Hamas have done, this awful terror organisation. Can the genie go back in the bottle, do you think?
No, I think what this has become is a watershed moment for mass migration. We've seen with that we've imported third world violent terror onto the streets of the West. It's not just Australia. There have been protests in European countries, including the United Kingdom, and people are shocked to see the hatred and lack of care for the civilization that we've invited people in to the West and said, you can come and live in this, peaceful, free country. And yet what we're seeing is a rebellion against every value and principle that we have fought for and that our great-grandparents have fought for. They would be ashamed if they saw those scenes coming out like we saw in the Opera House. What did we spend the last World War fighting for, if not to make sure this never happens again? I think it was Brendan O'Neill who wrote in the Spectator last week, what happened to never again? Well, I can tell you what, and the anti-fascists, where's Antifa? I haven't seen Antifa on the streets complaining about genuine fascism and genuine Nazi-style ideology in this Islamic terror.